work in particular, but assessors for investing people are kind of registered practitioners, so we pay a fee, we have to meet CPD requirements, and it's a kind of self-employment kind of relationship. But it's been a long relationship for me, and it's got me into some amazing places. So yeah, that's right, 250 organisations, 7,000 people I reckon I've interviewed or thereabouts, one-to-one about what it's like where they work. So I guess I've got some insight I should have, I suppose. I've recently just, fresh in my mind, finished the judging for the Investing People awards for this year, which I was judging the Gold and Overseas Employer of the Year awards. So that was really cool. 57 I judged. Real nice, inspiring reminder of some amazing organisations. So that's kind of where I come from. I guess I want to talk to you about what we're going to do today. So I want to give you a bit of an insight into it's a new framework, a new product from Investing People. We're slightly ahead of the curve because they haven't formally released it yet. And there was a bit of a debate about whether they were going to do a sort of hard rollout, soft rollout, when it would roll out, how they would do that. So they're happy for me to do this, but they've sort of said it's slightly in advance of the full rollout. And you'll see that when I go through some of the material. Some of it's still quite new and up for finalising. So I want to do is give you an insight into that, see whether or not it's something that you think there's any value in engaging with, talk about different ways of engaging with it potentially. And then I've took part in the pilot and I've worked with lots of organisations, so I could share some learning. I've got 3 case study organisations that I'll talk you through in terms of how they fared in the pilot and what sorts of issues came out. And I guess as with everything, what I'm trying to do is inspire us, challenge what we're doing, motivate us to maybe do new, different, take a different lens, look at things differently. And as I say, I have this passion for wellbeing. So I guess to put my cards on the table, my predominant window on wellness and wellbeing in organisations has tended to be mental health. Not surprisingly, because of the times in which we live and the pandemic. Those have been huge issues in all the organisations that I've worked with. So you'll probably hear me say when I talk about wellness and wellbeing, my default is that I guess I'm coming out with an assumption that mental health is on that list, but it needn't be. So just to put that on the table, if you see a bit of biased interest, that's guess what fires me up. I thought I should sort of cover why is Investing People relevant? Why do we care? Why do I, as a independent practitioner, still align myself with them? What have they got to say? It's been around a long time. Is it still relevant? What's its position? And I suppose lots of people come to Investing People because they've heard of it. It's out there. It's internationally as close as you're going to get to an internationally recognised people standard. 66 countries have got a formal licence with Investing People, notably not America. And I don't really understand why you can draw your own conclusions. I think though it's something to do with the way that business policy is set. But of course, it's got pretty wide recognition. I think the thing for me that keeps me close to Investing People is that it's much more, and this is sometimes not easy for clients to sort of take on board, it's much more than an award. If you're doing Investing People or you're thinking of doing an Investing People journey in order to secure a gong, I'd think twice, because you won't get the full value from engagement with the product, if you like. It's very much meant to be a wider journey that offers, yes, it offers award structure, but it also offers something much more robust than that. And I've worked with the framework and it's been in various formats over the years I've worked with it. The current format is widely recognised by those of us who work with it as the best and a really powerful one. It's been in its current form for about 5 years now. So pretty robust. What's interesting about it for me, and this is new, I suppose, the last time the 5 years ago when they refreshed it, is that it's much more academically and research based than it ever was before. It was a bit of a coming together of the great and the good before, whereas this time around they used the research on high performing organisations from Maastricht University and took that model, and that's what forms the basis of the award. So what you got is something much more robust than an award, and you'll probably feel if you're working with an assessor, they'll be frustrated if you're not interested in what you could do differently, better, where you go next. And that's kind of inherent in the model, I suppose, and in the value we try and deliver. I try and stick to the 4 words you can see I picked out on the right there. I think it's about celebrating what organisations do well. I exist in a world of good practice, really. Mostly the organisations I deal with, by the fact that I'm working with them, are the more forward-thinking organisations, whether that's investing people or coaching. But I think we have to celebrate that. And so Investing People gives obviously a way of getting an award associated with that, and that can have some useful leverage. I think it's about motivating us to do new, different, better, to challenge ourselves. And that challenge, I think, is very much part of it. So again, I think if someone was just looking for an award, I had a client recently saying, look, we're weighing up, should we do Great Places to Work or Investors in People? And I kind of said, well, look, go away and ask yourselves a different question, because the chalk and cheese, really. One is about you making the case how great you are. The other is about how great you are compared to a recognised framework. So they're 2 quite different journeys. I have clients who do both, but so I think that's where I come from. It's meant to be very bespoke. It does, obviously, we do have, I suppose, practitioners and investing people have something of a unique position. It's hard to get experience of hundreds of organisations, right? Now, having said that, I don't get very deeply into all of those. I'm obviously working at a strategic kind of level, although I do have quite honest conversations with their people, so I suppose that gives it power. But for me, that's why I've kept working with it. I think it's those of us who work with investing people are highly critical of it, as you'd imagine. It's, when you know something well, you care about it, you care about the mission that's behind it, about making work better. It matters, and we're quite critical of it. So I think one of the things that makes me feel, again, kind of robust about it is that it is continually out there being applied, tested. Organisations still use it. If you've never seen it before, and apologies if you're familiar with investors, just a quick intro in terms of it makes sense before we talk about wellbeing, just give you a quick overview of investing in people itself. That's kind of the structure to it. So you've got a framework that's made up of 9 things. Each of those in turn is broken into 3 things. So in reality, you've got 27 things to look at. And depending on how many of those you meet, it gives you a different level of accredited award. And I'm not naive enough to think that we would probably have as many clients as we do if we didn't have the awards. I think that's right and appropriate. But of course, it's not about the award. I would rather an organisation didn't get accredited but did things properly so that they get a real strong return on those later than I would that they rush through polishing everything to get it through an accreditation and then don't do it in a way that gives sort of sustainable benefit. But nevertheless, that's how it works. And I'm not going to expect you to memorise that, but it gives you a sort of flavour of where this fits in. The best quote I've heard from a client was that intelligence standard that needs to be used intelligently. I think that's very true. So I think what this offers us is something on all sorts of levels, and I've been able to use Investing People to engage with some pretty clients who are very early in the journey, right? We don't have a one-to-one approach yet. We haven't really got HR. We're sort of micro businesses. How do we make sense of all this? I work with a couple of those on a monthly basis at the moment. And then right up to mega organisations with 500 people in their HR team who are looking to be challenged in a different way. And where we're having kind of professionally challenging conversations. And I've found it works all the way through. That gives me a sort of confidence. One of the things I really like about it is it means that I have a level of independence from perhaps the average consultant who's in there trying to sell a particular solution, in that really what we're about is the strategic overview and not particularly pushing any particular solution. So I like that. I like working within that slightly more objective space, So that's, I guess, the rationale for maybe being interested in what investing people have got to say and where they're coming from. I'm going to skim this, I guess, but why should we be interested in wellbeing? I mean, it can't have escaped any of us that it's a huge deal. I think the last figures I saw said 70 million days lost in the UK per year to wellbeing, wellness issues, most of those to mental health issues. Depression and anxiety still massively rated high up the list of epidemics according to the World Health Organization. Depression still top 5 disease in the world. I don't claim to have a sort of magic lens on that, but repeatedly over the last few years, clients are continually telling me that they're dealing with more and more mental health issues in particular. But also I'm getting, I suppose, increased interest from people who recognise that not just the value of wellbeing in terms of attracting staff in a competitive market, but the overlap between wellbeing and performance and the right culture and the kind of organisations that we want to create. So there's a huge overlap, I guess, for me, and you'll see this through the rest of what I'm going to talk to you about. That really we're talking about much the same things. We know what helps people to flourish. We just do. I mean, we can mess around the edges of research, but the reality is we've known since the 70s, certainly the 80s, fundamentally what helps people to perform at their best. And all those things are enshrined in the Investors in People framework because it's based on reality, not drawn up in a classroom. You'd expect that. So a sense of being valued, a very clear sense of what's expected of you, faith in your leaders, a sense that you're trusted, all those sorts of things that Investing in People looks for. Now, those are the same things that empower wellbeing. So there are reasons, and on the left, you'll see those are the things. I've just chopped the bullet points there out of the draft Investing in People publication that will be supporting the launch. And you can see some obvious reasons in there. So you can come at it from a numbers point of view. You can be looking at just numbers. It makes sense from a money point of view to look at wellbeing. If we can lower sickness absence, and that's costing us money. If we can help reduce absence, help people to be more productive, right? There's a money reason for doing it. For me, really, it goes further than that. And I suppose this won't surprise you because I work in this sector. But for me, it's about, well, why would you not? We have an opportunity to create workplaces that are better than they currently are or have been, that engage people more, that support their wellness as a human being, that help them to flourish. Why would we not? The evidence is very clear that doing so pays back more than it costs to do. More on that as we come up to the content of the standard. But for me, it's a really clear case. And again, you can see my mental health lean in there. That's pretty recent. 1 in 4 people in the UK are going to experience what would constitute a diagnosable mental health disorder this year. So that alone, for me, means, look, why would we not be doing something or at least aspire to do something to support wellbeing? Of course, what is it? And I think this is interesting. I just thought, I'll just see what's the latest kind of, if you Google wellbeing, what happens? And I was familiar with the idea that there were pillars to wellbeing. I think if you do like a lot of the kind of training in it, they use this pillars concept quite a lot. But what was interesting was that Google, it shows you the questions people are commonly asking, and it's there was a question: what are the 7 pillars of wellbeing? What are the 9 pillars of wellbeing? What are the 11 pillars of wellbeing? And it got up to 17. So presumably there's some disagreement in the academic world about exactly how many pillars of wellbeing there are. I've plumped for 6. But just to put it in the right space, what are we talking about? Psychological well-being has been the biggest by far that I've seen my clients wanting to engage with. You could argue some of these fit under that. Social well-being is sometimes called out separately, but you could equally argue that's part of psychological well-being. Similarly, spiritual well-being. I've only worked with one organisation that called that out as a very specific goal, but it's a feature. Obviously of psychological well-being and social well-being as well. They're one of the case study organisations that you'll see is very much into financial well-being, 2 of them really, based on the current demands and recognising that they had workforces that were disproportionately affected by economic challenges, hard up like the rest of us. And digital well-being is another thing that you sometimes see. I think the important thing is not really so much how you define it, and it's really, as you'll see, about which is relevant to you and why. The flavour, I guess you would say, psychological wellbeing. Typically, most of the clients I've seen tackling that will have trained mental health first aiders. The better ones will have some sort of advocacy, promotional, developmental training, learning element that supports that. Physical typically is activity groups. One of the organisations that you'll see in the case study was doing walks down the River Thames. More on whether or not that does what you want it to do later. But that's the kind of world we're talking about, right? So for me, investing in people gives us a reason to look at it. Well-being, I just, you know, I'm happy to have an offline conversation to make the case more, but I think, my read is we all kind of get that. It's worth looking at. It's important. It's about creating modern, human, productive workplaces, as well as it is about just mitigating the negative effects of poor well-being. This is from the Investing People draft document. Again, it takes a slightly different view. It doesn't try and define the pillars. It sort of says these are things that might be involved that you might want to be thinking about when it comes to well-being. So I suppose it differs there in that it calls out culture, that we should be thinking about culture when we're thinking about well-being. That makes sense, right? It calls out safety, interesting for me. One of the case studies very much safety-led. Growth and development. So again, I'd put that under psychological well-being, I suppose, as a pillar. But we know that people flourish, that they give their best if they feel that they are expanding, growing, developing. All right. So that's how investing people look at it. So this is how they actually structure it. And this is the if you took nothing else, and the detail of what we get stuck into is a bit too much for you. This is quite useful. I think we could have a pretty good workshop as a group of HR professionals just armed with this, in terms of, I think I could take an organisation through a process of saying how we're doing these things. And so what it does is it's the same down the left there, the same approach as investing in people at its core: leading, supporting, improving, or plan, do, review, which is what you'd see in pretty much every quality standard, same sort of structure. And then it gives 3 themes against each of those 3. So it says if we're leading it, we need to think about how we put it together in the first place. What's feeding it? What is our wellbeing strategy? What are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? How do we know that? And then who owns it? Have we got good levels of ownership of that? I guess you'd obviously be looking for leaders to own that, for people to understand it. And then how are we putting that into practice? What does it mean to live it? Are our leaders exhibiting it? So obviously, if you're trying to create a culture which is strong on psychological support, trying to minimise sources of stress, that's not going to be helped if you've got leaders who are banging the table and shouting and adding stress to people's lives. So there's an obvious need to look at how the leaders are performing, and managers as well. And the supporting, you can see, makes sense, right? How are we connecting? So we're saying, how are we connecting people? If we've got this wellbeing strategy, how are we connecting people with it? Do they know about it? Do they know what's available? Do they understand it? Do they know what to do? And then the aligning piece is about, does it line up with what are our challenges as an organisation, but also with other things? So, for example, with our wider culture, with how we reward people. It's an interesting example. My partner works for Waitrose, and like many supermarkets, they have developed partnerships with other providers. One of those is with Johnson's Dry Cleaners. And so they make a Johnson's Dry Cleaners offer through a Waitrose store. Right? You can take your suit in or whatever and get it laundered. And they introduced, just the way Johnson's were used to working, they introduced targets as incentives to sell and engage people with the dry cleaning. Completely destroyed the customer service culture for a couple of weeks until they stopped it, because they were utterly not used to competitive targets. They really didn't line up with their wider culture. It was completely in conflict with the messages they sent about customer service. It created a strange dynamic on the desk, right? So thankfully they dropped it. But so we have to get other things right if we want to get our culture right, and if we want our well-being to line up with that. And then how do we engage people with that? Well, that's obvious, right? So we've actually got to make sure people are taking up the opportunities, are doing what we want them to do, are feeding back, are giving us the information we need, that managers are putting into practice, that kind of stuff. Not surprisingly then, plan, do, review. So the last one about improvement. So how are we measuring it? Now, you'll see in a minute, we come from the case studies, big challenge for a lot of people. How do we measure wellbeing impact? What are we looking for? Do we even have the systems in place to do that? What might we be trying to measure? How are we actually improving it? And how are we making it stick? How are we making it sustainable? Big part of the investing in people message is really about saying, look, you can have a happy organisation. Tomorrow we could give everybody a donkey as a bonus and a magic flute, and we'd have happy people, but we'd go out of business next month. So we have to find ways of doing this that make it sustainable. And really with investing people. That's about it being closely related to where the organisation is going and what its challenges are. Same thing in this wellbeing framework. So that, as I say, that's the overall shape of it. I think if you did nothing else, we could kind of probably generate from that within an organisation some interesting ideas about what we do, don't do well, what we could do better. It's supported by the same structure as the rest of investors in people. So there are 4 levels, if you like: developed, established, advanced, high performing, and they correspond to the Investors in People award colour, if you like. So if you meet everything at the developed level, you've got stuff in place, you get the standard recognition, still significant achievement, right? Established would correspond to silver, advanced gold, obviously high performing platinum. There's only one platinum wellbeing organisation recognised against this current framework, so that's relatively new. Platinum is a massive ask. I've had 2 platinum clients over 20 odd years of working with the standard. One's still current, one no longer is, and they're exceptional. Well, advanced at the gold level, about 17-20% of organisations hit gold at first assessment. Most of the time it's a longer journey, but that might reflect how we engage with them as well. You can see there's a sort of a bit of a description given there about the kind of dynamic it's looking for. So right at the high point, to get a platinum, you're looking at really well embedded practices, really focused on results, really supported by measurement, real sense of accountability and evidence of continually making it better. So it's a big ask, and nonetheless, right, a good place to be if you can get there. So that's the sort of structure in broad terms. Now, I took 3 organisations through it, the pilot phases from different sectors. So construction organisation, about 150, 140, bigger across Europe, which was an interesting dynamic because what it revealed was that wellbeing was owned in a different place to HR. So at the bottom, I've sort of just tried to give a quick illustration of how close together I thought the things were being managed. And so you have a group level structure, pan-Europe, in this organisation, and wellbeing was owned at that level. Very significantly, it was owned by health and safety. And particularly because it had a stress element. And of course, we know stress is recognised as something we have to tackle under the Health and Safety Work Act. So big stress drivers and compliance drivers, and helpful in some ways because that helped us, it was coming on the back of a strong safety culture. It was much easier to get, I think, for that organisation to get penetration with messages. And so they did a lot of training of managers in mental health, a lot of mental health awareness, stress awareness, sort of tools. But interestingly, quite divorced from HR. The finance organisation I did, smaller, slightly different focus, more social, probably not coincidentally, very much about home working. So, you can sort of see the logic. We're working massively at home. We've identified that we want to make sure people have good, strong social engagement for reasons that are both human and business oriented, to help collaboration, to make it easier for us to do things together, to break down barriers, right? So social and financial, quite a lot of younger staff at earlier stages of their career disproportionately affected by cost of living rises. And then the last one, much bigger. Now it's interesting, I don't know how common this is, but it's probably not that uncommon, in that wellbeing there was led as a project by someone outside of HR. So not led within HR, like a champion sort of group project manager. And again, that was true of the finance organisation. So that was quite interesting in terms of how it played out. But I'll come back to sort of, just give you an illustration of how it played out for those 3 to see if it rings any bells or presses any buttons for you. So this is the meat. This is the standard as it is in its final draft. And this is the form that investing people take. So you'll recognise this if you have engaged in investing people before. If not, this is a consistent sort of format you'd see across the main standard as well. So you've got those 4 levels I talked about, and then you've got the themes down the side. So indicator 1, leading, and then the 3 themes. So in order to meet the standard, you'd need to meet all 3 of those requirements in the developed column. So you've done something to get your vision and your aims out there, or at least identify them and do some planning about what you're actually trying to achieve with wellbeing. I cannot tell you, or I will in a minute, how much of a challenge that turned out to be for the organisations that were involved. And then at the only level, you need to have looked at what benefits you want. So it's saying, why are we focusing on this? It's about cogent structure, a cogent reason to why we're going to do these things. And then let's identify what the benefits of that should be. Now, it's notoriously difficult to measure, and depending on how mature you are as an organisation, you might be quite a long way away from having sophisticated data even on your people. I mean, one of these organisations, the construction organisation, struggled to tell me how many people were absent for mental health reasons. They just didn't have that sort of level of sophistication. So they were looking mainly at survey data. So you don't have to have the level of sophistication, but obviously you can see it's beginning to say, let's look at how we might measure this. Let's look at what that looks like in view of what we're trying to achieve, right? And then you can see an overlap with the main standard down the bottom there. We've got core values, and we're using those values to create a positive culture and a sense of shared purpose. Very hard to see how you can deliver a message of well-being and sustain it if that's not a kind of central part of what you're doing. So for me, that's not a big ask really to meet those first three. I mean, you can see as it develops. I won't take you through all of them because time and tedium will defeat you. But this is all available to have a look at. And if you engage with me or invest in people, we can do this in more detail. But you can see how those things sort of develop. So take the shaping, for example, at the advanced level, it's saying, well, we should have given some thought to how we need to equip managers to support wellbeing. Yeah. So, for example, if it's about mental health, well, do our managers have the skills? Do they know what to do? One of the organisations, the financial one in the pilot, was really focused on helping managers understand when to refer someone to the IIP counselling support, and not really on what to do either to sort of minimise the likelihood of creating undue stress or to respond to somebody's wellbeing needs on the way there. So you can see there that's really targeting that. For me, when working with the organisations I did, what this one sort of threw up was just so much stuff that we do in wellbeing is good stuff, isn't it? So you might have a walking group and they just did the 3 Peaks Challenge, and you've got a book club and they meet on a regular basis and participation's going up. And we might have, we tell everyone it's blood pressure week and we put an email out for that. And we've got an EAP that people can ring, and we might have half a dozen mental health first aiders. What was really interesting for me, and it creates an interesting dynamic, is that, of course, all of that is brilliant. And all of that is better than most organisations in the world are doing. And it's brilliant. And I just would not want to discourage it. On the other hand, because it's all brilliant, what I found was quite a lot of it just wasn't challenged. Now, if you sort of dip your toe heavily into learning and development, you'll be familiar with kind of having to ask yourself, so what? This is very much sort of the part of the dialogue that we use to try and evaluate what's the point of what you're doing. So we've sent loads of people on a management development program. So what difference did it make? And I found that was very much a theme. So one of the organisers gave me a huge list of stuff they'd done. And then you would say, okay, so what? So you've got 80, in one case, 80 mental health first aiders trained. Now, look, I'm not going to argue that the world is probably a better place for you doing that. It must be, mustn't it? But what difference did it make? Was that what was your goal? And so I found we were very much in this sort of space of, look, this is all good stuff, isn't it? And that was kind of reflected in the senior level view of it as well, as it was all good stuff. In the case of the construction company, very much also preventative stuff. We don't want bad stuff happening. So justified on that view. But don't know to what extent they really understood that what we're talking about here are the same things that drive high performance. So, the reason for having a one-to-one catch-up with someone who reports to you, there's many reasons for that. One of the most powerful ones is to make sure they're all right, okay? So that is a performance reason to have those conversations. And I think there was less understanding at senior leadership level that the sorts of interventions that we're making on wellbeing are also about performance. They're about helping people to give their best. Real big theme for me is that, come back to what I said earlier, we know what enables human high performance. We just know. It's about making it stick, making it real and implementing it. And I think what I found was more of a sense of, look, this is all great stuff to do. Of course, we want to do all this stuff. No one's going to argue with you. But it was more difficult to find a sense of alignment between what are the challenges the organisation is facing, and therefore what are we doing in wellbeing, and how might we measure that. And the champion group thing was really interesting. So I think who's going to criticise, right? It's a great thing to do, isn't it? You send people off there doing all this champion work. But to what extent was it? So what? Did that line up with what? What is that? What's going on there? So good stuff, but strategic, not so sure. That sort of carried on through this one, the second indicator here. So you can see, again, those things we touched earlier, connecting, aligning, engaging. Same thing, you'd have to meet the ones on the left-hand side in order to meet the standard in its minimum form. And then as you go up, you have to meet increasingly all of them to meet the higher level. So you'd have to meet all of them to get a platinum, or if you wanted a gold, you'd have to meet all of the developed, established, and advanced ones. But again, I think on the left, these things make sense. We're supporting managers so that they can actually include or have some awareness of wellbeing matters when they talk to their people. Right? That seems logical. The alignment thing, reward and recognition, we're creating an environment where people feel valued. Doesn't mean we have to be throwing money at them, does it? But, all kind of creative interventions. And then, of course, that we have appropriate policies. Again, I won't walk you through all the detail for the sake of time, but we can, there's an option to pick that up later and do that if you want. Here, I think it really threw up to me the thing about skills and capabilities of managers, that if we're really taking wellbeing seriously, we need to think about what we need of managers, and we need to upskill them, and we need to inform them, and we need to make them feel confident. And that becomes apparent here. So if you look at the connecting theme and look at the advanced thing, you're starting to get into, we want managers to be setting objectives that actually take into account wellbeing. So managers have got to have some skills, and it becomes sort of apparent. I think the other big thing for me that came across is, okay, so we've got participation, and we're looking at these, are people engaging with it, the bottom one. What was really interesting was there wasn't a lot of clarity about who we were actually trying to engage. So if I was being challenging, I would say that if we've got a walking group that's doing river walks that consists of people that were physically active already anyway, is that what we were trying to achieve? Well, no one's going to criticise it, because this obviously brings some good. But the question of whether it is or isn't, what we were trying to achieve, and whether or not it delivered what we wanted, I think, again, questionable. So that was really interesting. Can we be a bit more specific about who we're trying to reach? I think in mental health, that feels really acute, right? I guarantee you the people at most risk are the people who are not engaging with your wellness and wellbeing programs. I guarantee it. I mean, that is self-fulfilling. So if we're trying to open up people's willingness to engage in mental health, let's set that out as something that we'll talk about, and let's measure it. Let's at least ask people in a survey whether they feel any more or less fluent, or more or less likely to engage. So again, that thing about purpose. But again, I don't think that, at the developed level, that we're asking a huge amount before you're looking at potentially meeting the framework. The last of the three. This is in a slightly different format. That just shows you how draft it is, because the document I was looking at had a typesetting error, and had reproduced number 2 twice. So that's how hot off the press it is. But this is the last of them. So this one I really found that was interesting. As I alluded to earlier, some organisations that we work with are not very mature in terms of their use of data and metrics. That's fine. Work with all sorts of organisations, and wherever you are on this, it's meant to be useful. So straight away, when you'd be saying to people, okay, what difference has your mental health first aid training made? They would struggle to have a measure. So it kind of helps if you've got at least basic HR dashboard, but even if you haven't, just being out there asking, learning, getting a sense, and you can see where the measuring starts. Let's take some steps to get some data in place so that we can think about what difference it's making. Obviously, you'd expect that if we're about making it better and improving it, that we'd have some sort of learning going on. So training of managers, training of champions, training of specific skills, awareness sessions, all of those things you would potentially expect to see. And the sustaining requirement is very much that, look, you need to start with a proactive approach that's about preventative measures. first of all. So, and most organisations have done that, right? They start on mental health, for example, with a what to do if things are really serious is your first intervention. Makes sense. My happiness coaching takes me obviously into other areas of, okay, how do we maximise on that rather than just a reactive, preventative approach? And you can see that sort of, that's what's rolled out as you move towards the high performing, people understanding the impact, people really valuing it, people seeing that it's about something wider. The data I've talked about, the thing that was interesting is a lot of people measure their success by participation. I thought that was really interesting. We're doing really well because more people are coming along. Okay, on one level, yeah. Is that necessarily what you're trying to achieve? Don't know. Bit of a default measure, isn't it? The best things I saw were about the detail. That when part of what you'll see here, if you look at the enhancing requirement at advanced, and that's gold level, is about proactively looking for stressors. And the biggest impact things I saw were where teams, managers, maybe with some help from HR, I've got stuck into what are specific demands on this team. So in the finance one, part of it very much customer focused, very demanding, all day on the phone, customers, complex problems. They worked out a slightly different series of breaks. The construction one very much looking to understand the project cycle. Where were the tweaks, the sort of squeezing points, the tight points where mental health was at its worst, and trying to look at how they could mitigate that. So they were really specific things that are the most apparent and the most impactful. So this is how they came out. 2 silvers and a met, if that's not a quick way of catching it. Though enough going on. The construction company, the principal recommendations that I worked with them on were to get their metrics a bit better. It's actually an enormous amount of measurement going on from health and safety, loads of surveys and stuff, but it was quite hard to square what they'd done with that information and how that was feeding back into the strategy. But enough to get a silver there. And I'm looking at helping them to take forward this idea of exploring the project cycle and why at certain points in delivery of a project people are under much more stress and what we could do about that. The finance one, which was slightly closer, HR and wellbeing interaction, really about just clarifying what you want to achieve a bit more in order to get to that gold level. Enough there for the silver, and getting stuck into managers. I sort of found when I spoke to the managers that they were a little bit rabbits in headlights when you said, what would you do if you had someone on your team who, for example, I don't know, was returning to work after a break for mental health, or was showing signs of being at risk of stress or whatever. And the public sector one met at the standard level. Really, that was the fact that they hadn't yet really got the conversations about wellbeing into their one-to-one cycle. So, but actually, there's some other really good practices, but we really need to do that more. So my work with them has been allowed to do that, and how you might take that forward. In terms of the learning for me, as we bring it to an end, I suppose one of the things I thought was interesting about the construction business was that they were all used to hearing the same old reasons as to why you should do an appraisal, why you should do a training plan, why you should. What seemed more powerful was the reasons to do it, because otherwise somebody might suffer from excessive stress and their mental health will go downhill. And actually that was like the whole lens that they positioned their people strategy under. It was like a wellbeing mental health lens. I'd never really thought about that before as a, I'd seen it as a sort of add-on, but as the key lens, I thought that was really interesting. I suppose I've seen that perhaps when I've looked for it in kind of purpose-led organisations, particularly ones that maybe are working with vulnerable clients who perhaps have a dominant ethos that then they just bring back and widen to staff. Like I said, I think there's a risk that we end up doing a big bucket of good things and nobody ever challenges us, because who's going to say, no, I don't want them to go for a walk down a tender. I don't think that running club's worthwhile. On the other hand, I think we have to demand of ourselves whether these things are really delivering what we want. I said about high performance culture there, and for me, it is about universal truths. We know what makes people give their best. We know if you look at the education and guidance and training around how to support somebody to return to work from a period of mental ill health, all the things on the list are the same things we're trying to do, and investors in people's main standard. Good supportive management, clarity, clear understanding of both what's expected of them, of how to get support, of how they opportunities to grow, feeling that they're respected. All of those same things are true. So again, they just really kind of reinforce that for me. And the power of getting into the specifics, you know, really when you see managers engaging with wellbeing issues in terms of how they really play out for that department and you know, what they can do about that, I think that was really powerful. So I was really pleased to be involved. Just to close that and give an opportunity to questions and stop listening to me. I suppose what you could do with it, but you might go next, if that's just information, if that helps you to just understand what's going on with investing people, where they're at, that's great. If you do nothing else, you know, maybe it will help you to just spur on a few thoughts about how sort of strategic your wellbeing stuff is, or potentially how you might get that accredited if that is of appeal to you. You could just do a desktop assessment. You could do that through the IIP Centre with someone like me. You could do that yourself. There's an integrated survey, as there is with the main standard, so you could undertake the survey. I think they haven't quite worked out the price of that yet, but the idea is to make that very accessible, so you could just do the survey, see how you come out. Or you can do a more full version, and that might be, typically would be survey, would be some strategic work between someone like me and HR, senior team, whatever. We'd do one-to-ones or focus groups, and then you'd get a full feedback report and all that stuff that Invested in People does. But I'd hope that one of those might tickle your fancy, or at least to leave you with some thoughts in terms of what it might mean for you. If you want to seek out Investing in People, there they are, and not difficult to find. By all means, hopefully reach out to them or reach out to me if you want to talk any more about this, whether it's right for you, how you might engage, and I can handle your sort of introduction to Investing in People as well. You don't have to work with me. There's loads of assessors out there. Or if you want to talk to me about coaching, obviously, or anything else, reach out. I'm happy to do that. I find it stimulating to interact with other professionals. So I think that's me. I guess I'm happy now. Enough of my voice. It's even boring me now. Opening up to any questions or any discussion.
Right, should we open up for questions now? Thank you very much for that, Gary. That was really informative.
Not at all. Thank you.
I'm gonna start with a question. When you're working with a company, do you help the senior leadership team to understand the importance of measuring, and do you give them any direction on maybe how they can measure if they don't know how to do it yet?
Yeah, I think that's a really common question, isn't it? And I think the current world suggests that it's really complicated. I think if you look at even the CIPD's guidance around measurement, I think sometimes inadvertently makes it sound really complicated. So we're talking about things like human capital value metrics, and measures like profit per employee. And for me, I think the typical dashboard of HR measures is obviously makes sense. If you need to be sitting on top of, as best you can, absence, mental health instances, reasons behind other types of absence, usage of things that you're providing. But as much as anything else, it's less sophisticated than people would think, but it's about asking the right questions. So if we're clear about what we want to try and achieve, my default is always, well, let's ask people. So we're using surveys, are we asking specific questions about what we're trying to achieve? Do you feel any more enabled to? Do you feel more supported? Do you feel as if, whatever? And for me, that's data. I think it doesn't have to be, and rarely is, in my experience, massively sophisticated data that requires all sorts of metrics. But does that? I suppose that in a way it's an unsatisfactory answer. And I think it would be nice if it was nice and neat, and you could just go, okay, it's these things. But
I suppose it's a bit. It comes down to the organization, size of the organization, and how far away into, the structure they are.
I think there's some of that. I think often it's about, what gets measured gets done, isn't it? I think that's an old truth. So for me, it's more about having some attempt to follow up on the impact of whatever we're doing. If we're training mental health first aiders in order to presumably, right, other than just to have a tick in the box to show we've done something, and there might be a reason for that at a certain time, but, you know, that's not a great reason for doing it. If we're doing that in order to try to reduce the stigma or increase the incidence of conversations about mental health, then let's just ask people, has it? You know, 6 months later, 3 months later, that's data, right? And then when we ask them again, and the construction company I talked about was really good at that. They were really good at asking lots of detailed questions in their own survey, and they developed their own measure, which was about number of good days per week. So they asked people, you know, how many good mental health days do you feel that you have on an average week? And they aggregated that and got a score for that across the organisation. Now that's, you know, that's their own devising, but it just comes from the clarity, which is what we're trying to do. What we're trying to make sure people have good mental health as much as possible. So how could we measure that? Well, I suppose we can ask them. I've never, in all the organisations I've worked with, really gone anywhere that's got anything that looks like the sort of hypothetical things that we are told might exist. You know, I just haven't. I'm sure they're out there. Maybe I don't work with organisations that sophisticated, but for me, the most powerful stuff is measures that follow on why you were doing it in the first place and the clarity of that, you know?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Any questions from the audience?
You never know, do you, if that's a good sign or a bad sign. I'm so comprehensive, but
I found that you were answering my questions as they popped in my head, so I think it's a good sign.
It's quite a lot to sort of, you know, potentially there's a lot there, isn't there? And I know that this medium means I'm talking for longer than I normally would without engaging with people, but all of that stuff there is available for further exploration. So if people have sort of got a general impression, okay, do you know what, I think we might meet that, there might be some advantage in doing that, then reach out to me, I'll connect you with that process. So it's all available there for, you know, for further sort of exploration, or it might be you kind of take away an idea that makes you think about what you're doing. I think, you know, like lots of things, in a way, I was both sort of excited and disappointed to find that what I learned from the exercise seemed quite obvious. Know what you're trying to do, make it important, focus on the outcome. It seems like too simple, really, doesn't it, on one level? But that's fundamentally a large part of what investing in people is about. Of course, it's got some other stuff in it as well that's specific to the people. A lot of it's about make it important, make sure other people think it's important. The construction company were really interesting from that point of view, because I was a bit worried that their reaction might be when I said silver, and they've been doing this for 5 years and they've already won various awards for their well-being. And in the end, she came back and said, do you know what, I was a bit challenged by it to start with, but I actually think it'll be really helpful in the long run, because a lot of what we're doing about well-being is not a legislative requirement. And so if I was challenged on the expenditure, I'm not got my ducks lined up to say what impact that's having on performance and why that expenditure is still justified and why. And so I thought that was really interesting. You know, they come at it from a safety compliance point of view. So, okay, they could make the argument, well, if we don't do this and something terrible happens, we're liable. Yeah, but since she wanted to do, and they were doing things that were much more, you know, went much beyond that. I think she thought the idea of continually trying to link that back to performance, and just make sure leaders bought in on that level, that this is about creating the workplaces of tomorrow in which people flourish, not just preventing people from suicide or from long-term sick leave or, you know, back pain.
I've actually found the process really, really helpful and opened my eyes to certain things, and the outcome wasn't what I expected from the surveys. And it was really, really nice to see those things where they're like, oh, didn't expect to see that.
Right, so better than you thought, you mean? Or...
Well, sometimes better, and sometimes, you know, there was something that came up in our survey which we thought, oh, we didn't expect that. And that's just about perception of how the staff are perceiving what we're doing, or lack of transparency maybe on our part. So I found it a fantastic experience to go through and learned a lot from it.
brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think over the years I've worked with investing people, I think everybody can probably think of an organisation that's got investing people that doesn't deserve it, or at least didn't behave like it. So I always say to people, look, it's an MOT. It's on the day. It's based on the, I can't guarantee tomorrow you're not going to go away and do something that's not. But on the whole, we still have held our own in a demanding market of people that don't have to do investors in people, really don't have to. And are very intelligent and still choose to invest in it as an intervention that helps them to move along. Obviously that, I suppose for me, my kind of gut feel is that if it's not clear to us that every pound we spend on people is not going to come back many times over, then we're missing a trick as professionals, because that's true, right? So
well, I had a question in an interview the other day, asking me if we were a part of Investors in People and asking me to explain that further. So it is something that candidates definitely look at.
Yeah, and certainly on the wellbeing side of things, we've seen as well some impact there. I mean, because it's still relatively new, I think, and there aren't that many organisations who've got it. And I guess because of it's become much more of an issue. I'm definitely getting a sense. I spoke to a client the other day. They were recruiting apprentices at an apprenticeship fair. And they said they spent most of their time talking to apprentices about the wellbeing stuff they did, because that's what was kind of marking them out. And interestingly, they also said, and I don't know if this was typical just to them, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a trend, but they said that they were having some quite open conversations about mental health. And people were saying, okay, I suffer a bit from anxiety. How will I do in your organisation? I don't know if I could work in your sector. I don't know if I'm cut out for it. These sorts of very honest conversations that begged sort of inclusivity as well as discussions of well-being. So I thought that was interesting to hear back. Whether, people say, don't they, that the new generation is more concerned with matters of well-being and work-life balance than past generations were. I don't know. But I certainly see some signs of that. I think we all are, aren't we, a bit more?
It definitely brings value to the organisation. There's no, well, I'm for it. I'm for it.
Well, I always love a convert. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about something I care about. So I hope it's planted a seed somewhere for somebody. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for listening. And for those who are still with us, thank you.
Gary, thank you for your time. It's been really informative and lovely to have you.
Excellent. Well, again, I'm happy to do. Next time I've got something hot and burning I want to share, I'll give you a shout.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Best of luck. Peace and love.
Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.